3 years ago, I spent my life savings on what turned out to be a rotten boat. I spent a year at sea, blissfully unaware of what was awaiting me. And on the 1-year anniversary, I took the boat out of the water. And that is when I discovered the true state of the vessel. A 2-week haul-out turned into a multi-year refit, and in the last few episodes, I started restoring the stern, without any prior woodworking or boat building experience. I'm an animator and filmmaker by trade, now learning how to work in a completely different medium, restoring my dream home. So come along on this journey of restoration and rediscovery of the crafts of old. After a long and hard winter, living under the wet tarps that had covered the boat, spring was finally starting to show her face. The leaves were returning to the previously barren trees, and the air was filling with birdsong. I was finally getting some light inside the boat, and the days of having a constantly wet puppy was finally over. And with the fresh spring air, both me and the wood could breathe once again. In step with the return of spring, I'd finally started to get some fresh wood back in the boat, marking the beginnings of her revival.
Alright, so next here I want to start looking at fastening these pieces, so I can then take this piece out and have something to bend a fresh new one back into here. First I'm going to make a couple of blocks, get behind here so I can go through this plank here, and then we'll fasten up there, and then I can start thinking about sawing this out.
The stern was showing signs of a previous rebuild and hodgepodge repairs. Odd pieces of wood were fitted here and there, and I was struggling to make sense of some of the previous repairs. A slim piece of wood, barely half an inch thick, spanned the midsection of the frames, not nearly enough thickness to give any sort of reliable fastening.
So I've been saving a lot of these offcuts here because I knew I was going to make a few smaller pieces, and I need a piece of backing block here. I think I should be able to get that out of this.
Now you could argue that this wasn't a necessary piece, seeing as the stern had existed for all this time without it, but I figured why not give it a bit more strength. The flimsy piece that was there from before was riddled with rusty holes, and it wouldn't take a lot of force to crack it in half. So I figured spending a little bit of time to cut out a backing piece to strengthen it all up wasn't such a bad idea. Or maybe I was just stalling for time, because after this piece I was going to need to do some more advanced repairs. No more straight frames were going into the boat for now, at least. The complexity was going to get a lot steeper now. I was going to have to face the deterioration of the keel, and later on the fashion piece and the ring timber, not to speak of all the rotten frames in the hull going forward. But for now I was keeping those thoughts far, far away, focusing on the task at hand. While working back in the stern, I was realizing some design issues that I might want to change in the future. Some previous owner had cut a temporary access hatch in the deck, likely to access the exhaust hose, and never really repaired it, something that made me think that maybe in the future I should add a larger deck hatch to give me easy access to not only the quadrant but everything else down there. With the backing piece done, all I needed to do was to send a few fasteners into it and then on to the next project. While I kept working on my boat during the evenings and weekends, most of my time was consumed working on the North Star project. Having been relocated in the yard, I was now stern to stern with her, being able to have my morning coffee, looking into the progress being done. She arrived to the yard in incredibly bad shape, barely making it up the river. She was made in 1935 for Inuit fur traders in the Canadian Arctic, and she held a historic past, but age had taken its toll. She'd miraculously found a new owner just as she was taking her final breaths at the dock in front of the Maritime Museum. Someone with the will and the funds to save her in the nick of time. These boats seem to have an aura about them, as if they have some larger cosmic will of their own, bringing together the circumstances that will be their saving. From the outside, it looks like a string of random coincidences, perfectly aligning. And if you pay close attention, a red string of a fantastic story emerges out of the randomness. It was time to fix the keel. Electrolysis had melted a 2-inch hole into the wood. If I let it go any further, the result would have been similar to firing a gun to the hull of the boat. She'd been leaking when I had her in the water, and this was one of multiple suspected areas. All I needed to do was to router out a chunk of the keel and replace it with a fresh piece of wood. A trivial task, but for me who hadn't done it before, it felt like a towering mountain. Every big incision I made into the boat felt like a major risk, for I still didn't know if I was going to be able to get her back together again. But I'm lucky, because I was raised with an almost Icarian sense of self-belief. The kind of self-belief one needs to be dumb enough to take on such a stupidly big project. The plan was simple. Remove all the hardware, and I'd already removed the rudder post. Go in with the router and router out a chunk of the keel. Cut a new piece of keel from a fresh slab of wood. Drench it all in epoxy and squeeze it into place. With the new piece in place, I could get the hardware back, and that should be it. All fairly straightforward, so I got to it, making another hole in my boat. It was fairly difficult getting the wood out, even with the big router. It was still waterlogged, and I had to take it slow and steady. Working in such a tight space didn't make it easier. Floors and water tanks were gonna make it impossible to go with the big router all the way in. Alright, now I'm gonna see if I can bang these bolts out so I can make some room for the router here. Keep going. The plan is to go maybe 2 inches from the furthest bolts there. Give me room to router this out and fit a new piece in. They didn't cheap out on the big hardware on the boat. The rudder, the strut, and all the bolts were bronze, which made it even weirder that they decided to use galvanized nails to fasten the planks. I guess they didn't count on the boat making it this far, and I'm definitely sure they didn't count on some crazy Swede finding her and committing to keeping her afloat, no matter the cost.
last one. Now I can continue routing out the keel there. That took way longer than I hoped it would. Anyways, back to routing.
I hadn't gone full depth with the router. The wood was too wet to allow me to go that deep at a time, so I ended up putting in a thin piece of plywood, so I had something for the router to sit on when I did my second pass. I took as much wood as I could out with the big router. After that it was down to using the small one and a chisel to finish the job. If you're watching this episode and you're enjoying it and you haven't yet hit that subscribe button, I would be very happy if you did. Growing on YouTube as a small creator isn't easy, so hitting that subscribe button, hitting the like button and leaving a comment really helps me show up in the algorithm for YouTube. Thank you so much for your support. It took an incredibly long time to cut everything out, but once I'd planed everything square, it was time to cut a new piece to go in its place.
So good.
With the stock cut, all I needed to do was to take the square piece down to its final dimensions. I'm actually not 100% sure what kind of wood I ended up using. This was nonetheless 2 years ago, but I suspect it was a piece of fir that had been laying around. Making the piece was of course incredibly simple, as it was just a glorified rectangle, but cutting out the keel had taken me quite a long time. And while it only took a few minutes in the video, I believe I spent at least a whole workday on it.
Alright, so let's see if this fits.
Normally when you splice something like a keel, you taper your wood at a ratio of 12:1. But in this case, because I had hardware at both ends, I didn't deem it necessary and I had it confirmed by a shipwright. 4 massive bolts on each side of the piece and a whole bunch of epoxy was going to be enough. With the piece dry fitted in place, I could plane it down to its final thickness.
Right, so I've got my piece secured in place here, and now I'm gonna drill a hole through it here for the rudder shaft. Let's see if this works.
I decided to try and staple some thin door skin on top of the piece when I drilled my other holes, just to prevent any tear out. It only partially worked. I should have put more staples in there. Alright, so the time has come to get this new piece of the keel in place. So I prepared some epoxy here, and yeah, I'm just gonna get to it. Epoxying a piece of wood into a boat is kind of like putting icing on a cake. There's never enough epoxy. If you think you have enough epoxy, put some more. But don't eat it. That's a bad idea. The wood of the keel was in surprisingly good shape, seeing as it's been there since the 1940s. The deterioration from the electrolysis didn't seem to have spread much further into the wood. My worry was that the byproducts of the process had sucked lye deeper into the wood, but it seemed to be mostly surface level except for that hole along one of the bolts.
Shower.
6 months. That's how long I'd been in the yard now. This place was slowly becoming my home, as the scale of my undertaking was growing and growing by the day. In those 6 months I'd barely left the place, other than to get groceries or hardware for the boat. This is where I worked, lived, and had my project. If it wasn't for a few trails and a couple of hidden places nearby the yard, I would have probably gone insane by now. They call this place the Yard of Broken Dreams, and for a good reason. Many boats come here and end up in an infinitely escalating refit. Sounds pretty familiar, doesn't it? It's a liminal space, a space between two worlds. When you live here, you're not really part of society. And you're not really part of the free people that live on the water. You got one foot on each side. It's kinda like purgatory, but for boats. A place where destiny plays out, where some dreams are seen succeeding and some dreams crushed. And with the ever-present reminder of the crushing mass of the excavator, ripping boats apart, years and decades of history, lives and stories, lost and turned into landfill, pulled out of the hands of owners who couldn't pay their bills, or for one reason or another had to abandon their project. You're always reminded of what you're working against. Thank you so much for watching this episode, and an extra big thank you to every one of you who have either donated through PayPal or have become Patreons. If you're not already a Patreon and you want early access to episodes, bonus episodes, merch, and a whole lot of other perks, then check out the Patreon. You can either scan the QR code that is up in the left corner right now, or you can click the link in the description. There you can also find a couple of other ways to support this show. Liking, commenting, and subscribing is always greatly appreciated, and thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next episode.